False alarm. I thought that help was here. But it was my own reassurance bouncing around 100,000 times in my own ecosphere. If every time you speak you keep it off the record, consequently you can keep your record clear. And if you mute the speech that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early trial Neuralink volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the Bezos fear condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere, where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles, and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink 'em twice. Welcome to your ecosphere.
I've been 27 since 33.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. It's 'cause you are. They'll gladly stagnate a living wage, snap the chains and bury it. Labor slaves in rusty cages dragged behind a chariot, led by Mr. Racial Jungle, Joseph R. Iscariot, fighting over scraps as they barrage us all with variants and BuzzFeed clickbait, straight until we're paralyzed, trying to distract us from the concentration camps that Joe had swore he'd close but only chose to amplify, where they got 50-something kids in cages made for 5 to occupy. And no, she hasn't seen the camps, but Harris swears they're paradise. She tells us the facilities are safe, and that right down to the women, they are regularly sterilized. Then she throws her head back and she proceeds to laugh, that sort of heartless cackle you'd expect from someone working steadfastly on behalf of the virus and a Congress full of parasites. And where was I? I was busy cashing every blue check, demonstrating plainly all the narratives expected from the verified. I was busy breeding verbal leeches by the terabyte, train them to exsanguinate the wealthy while they sleep at night. Bleed the oil barons dry and barren. Say they showed us how to share and now we share alike. Tell them I contracted rabies from a feral mike. Now I'm just another species losing sleep to noise pollution and these glaring lights. Forced to change its habits and adapt to just survive. But now it's safe to say that some of us are thriving in the moment, throwing shit on presidential homes beneath the Paris skies. So if you feel like you're just powerless, I guess you bought the lie. But I can tell they're petrified of our collective might, 'cause I can hear those gentrifiers weeping at the sight of our collective rights. And I only can imagine the intensifying fear of knowing revolution's near. And all that's left to do is simply wallow in the thick anticipation of a rabid bite. And baby, one day you can ask your leaders just what that was like before you grab a slice. So if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. Honey, if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. See, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, and tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark because you aren't, because we aren't. You see, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and make you build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, where they'll tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark because you aren't, because we aren't.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Reade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion.
Welcome to the Politics of Survival. I'm your host, Tara Reade, and I am with someone whom I very much admire and follow his work, Don Cortier, who is a journalist, investigative journalist, as well as having his own show. So Don has experience with being an RT correspondent, as well as what it's like as an American to live in Moscow and to be a professional journalist. And he can give us a lot of insight about that. So welcome to the show, Don. Thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot for having me, Tara. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, great. So you have a show and I got to be on it last week. Can you tell everyone, and I see the logo behind you there, can you tell our audience a little bit about your show and a little bit about you and how you made the transition from America to Moscow, Russia?
Sure. Well, I'll start with me since I made my journey before I started this YouTube channel. But I basically studied Russian and history in university. I have a dual major, one in Russian language and literature and the other in history, with a focus on actually the fall of the Soviet Union. I was always, since a young age, actually, I think when I was 13, I really started getting into anti-imperialist theories, into Marxism and all this stuff. So that has always been an inspiration of my life as long as I've been an adult. That's why I chose to study Russian. I wanted to understand the history of the USSR from the socialist perspective. And after I graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just thought, what am I going to do with an education like that in the US? So I thought I'd move to Russia and improve my level of Russian here by being immersed in the culture and everything. Eventually, I ran into some people that were associated with Russia Today, and they just, saw something in me, and they offered me a job to train for several months to become a correspondent. And now I'm like one of the top people there. So
yes, you are. And you're very good at what you do. I follow your work.
Thanks.
And for those who want to follow it in Europe, that part of my audience is in Europe as well as America, please look at Rumble. That's the easiest place now to follow RT since all the censorship. And what are some other ways, Don, can people find your work?
Well, there's also, if RT.com is not blocked in your country, you can always go to the RT.com website and just click live on the top of the website. We have our own independent player. You can watch the news there, or you can go on Odyssey. Odyssey is also another, basically the same thing as Rumble, but just another company, another website that allows people to have their video content there without any sort of censorship. My channel is also there just in case, because, people like me are getting blocked and permanently banned left and right on YouTube. So it's just a matter of time. Everything's backed up on Odyssey if that ever happens and you want to watch my channel. But, like I said, I've been developing here as a journalist, and somewhere along the way, I decided I was going to fill my free time with developing this behind me, the Revolution Report YouTube channel. It's where I basically show people both the Russian perspective and the perspective of people who used to live in the Soviet Union about what was like there. Because in the West, at least in the United States, where I'm from, we only hear this perspective of people who defected from the Soviet Union. And these are actually this is actually a very small minority of people, but they come to the United States and they say everything was terrible in the Soviet Union. Everything, there was nothing good about it. When you talk to the masses of people who stayed there and you realize that they were actually terrified when the Soviet Union collapsed. They didn't want that to happen. In fact, there was a referendum held across the Soviet Union, and people overwhelmingly voted to preserve it. And when you talk to people who are still alive that lived in the USSR, they all say the same thing. Life was much better when we had free education, when we had free healthcare. People weren't starving. That's just like propaganda. Right. And the deficits, people always talk about, people had to wait in long lines for everything in the Soviet Union. That stuff's completely overblown when you talk to people who actually lived in it. So I wanted to
let's parse through that, because some of our audience is quite young, so they don't really remember the fall of the Soviet Union, because some of that did happen, but it was happening when Western forces were kind of stealing from the coffers of Russia before Vladimir Putin became president. So could you clarify sort of the timeline of when things did get difficult in the Soviet Union for people that might not know?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say it all kind of started from this period that is typically understood as the Era of Stagnation, which is the early 80s, the end of the Brezhnev period, when immediately when Gorbachev came to power. They call it the Era of Stagnation because the Soviet economy wasn't doing as well as it was in years prior. A lot of that has to do with the lowering of the global oil price that the Soviet economy heavily relied on to make money from abroad. But also there were real structural issues in the Soviet Union that needed restructuring, and that's no doubt the case. But there were different people that had different ideas of how to restructure things, and the people that wanted to go down the socialist path basically lost a power struggle. And Gorbachev came to power promising that socialism would be reformed by basically opening up free markets. And when that happened throughout the late 1980s, we started seeing the highest rate of deficits, the most shortages. That's the Soviet Union that the defectors remember. This time period towards the end when everyone was waiting in line for like basic necessities, which is because Gorbachev began this privatization of the economy. He started opening up a market economy, and the corruption that needed to be dealt with in Soviet society, that was a real problem. It needed to be reformed. It basically turned into a situation where these corrupt politicians that weren't dealt with were taking resources from the state economy and selling them on the black markets and making money and becoming the new capitalists. And that's why when people started going to, supermarkets that were run by the state, there were shortages all over the place. That eventually translated into the fall of the Soviet Union, where in the 90s, those people took over and it was just even worse than the early 90s and the late 80s when when the Soviet Union was going down that path. It was only after Vladimir Putin came to power in the early 2000s that he really put an end to that. And why? Because he took the mechanism of the state, and he actually put the oligarchs that existed in line. He gave them an ultimatum. He said, you either follow the rules that we're going to lay down now, which are not, are entirely in your favor, because we have to make sure that society develops correctly, or hit the road. And a lot of people hit the road, and
or were forced out, like Bill Browder, who was an American anyway, American oligarch.
Yeah, exactly. Who was getting away with tax fraud and like basically all of the rest of the capitalists at that time, because it was just generally accepted. And that's something that under Putin changed. So these capitalists that didn't get with the picture, the state came after them. And now they're like the most anti-Russian government people in the West, shouting from all the way over there. But, what did the average Russian person get from this? It was a beneficial situation. Their living standards have significantly improved since then.
Well, in my view, which was informed by things that I read, through Chomsky and other people like yourself that were actually there observing changes, or in Chomsky's case, he was here, but he was observing changes happening. Vladimir Putin created a middle class. There was no middle class at that time. Would you say that's about right? Yeah. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, of course, Russia's still a capitalist country with its own problems, but it definitely is a lot more stable, and there's a much bigger middle class than there was in the 1990s.
And Don, I wanted to point this out, that a lot of Americans are so uneducated about Russia that they still think it's communist. And so like sometimes in conversations in threads, I will remind people, Russia's communist. They'll say, Russia's capitalist. It's not communist, because they'll be saying, it's communist and it's this and that, but it's not. However, there is what I like that I've seen with Russia is this, and you and I kind of had this talk about this, is where it is in capitalism, there are still programs like childcare, like benefits for people that are having, need parental leave. There's pensions, there's medical care, there's education for people that need it. And, Vladimir Putin even gave, there was a surplus recently, and he gave that by upping the pensions and upping benefits for people. You don't see that in the United States. I mean, what is your view on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's I would say that's a combination of the fact that they have this Soviet legacy that was left behind, and the fact that and that's tied into the fact that the Communist Party in the Russian Federation is still one of the most powerful political forces in the country. It's the second largest political party in the entire country, second only to United Russia, which is at least informally the party of Vladimir Putin, or the party that openly supports him the most. And on the other hand, it has to do with the fact that, you know, Russia's kind of new to capitalism in a sense. I mean, obviously, it was capitalist before the USSR, but those times were pretty irrelevant by the time the USSR collapsed. And so the stage they're kind of in is not the stage of capitalist development that we see in the West of like monopoly capitalism, of degradation of society. They're kind of still in the you know, initial stages where capitalism is you know, not what we're seeing in the West. So.
Well, you brought up the monopolies, and I think that that's a really key point, because right now in the US, we have this concentration of wealth where, you know, 80% of the wealth or more, actually 85%, I think now, is owned by just a handful of people in the US. And that, and when that happens, you know, the workers are exploited extensively, and that's what you're seeing. And unions are being busted, like Amazon and Starbucks. You're seeing examples of how there's so much union busting, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, also here, of course, all over the world, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to unions and union organizing. But, you know, one thing that we could say about Russia, and this is something also I mentioned in our other interview on the Revolution Report YouTube channel, is that the way I see Russian society, the way I see the administration that rules over it, it's what I called basically a Bonapartist situation. This is something that Karl Marx wrote about, and it can only take place in very specific historical conditions, usually after some sort of revolutionary change in society. And we saw this with the transition from socialism to capitalism after the fall of the USSR. And even you know, after any sort of revolutionary situation, there's a period of chaos where classes, not one class can get their foot ahead of the other. And eventually, sometimes when this goes on for too long, you get some sort of strong man or someone related to the state bureaucracy that existed before this revolutionary period, that was not done away with. And they actually come to power in the state apparatus. And although the society is capitalist, it's not traditional in the sense that the capitalists are telling the state what they have to do, you know, because they're supposed to represent their own interests. We have the reverse, the way I see it in Russia, where the oligarchs, they do exist. There's a capitalist class, but it is actually accountable to the state bureaucracy. Right. Because of that, they can't do whatever they want. And that's why, for example, Russia's military operation in Ukraine, this is something that a lot of Russian oligarchs are not happy about, but there's nothing they can do about it, you know? And that's a much better situation than what we have in the West, I think.
I think, you know, we're all experiencing, you know, I live in the United States of America, and it's a very difficult time right now. And you and I have had the conversation about how difficult it is. Like, all the sanctions that were imposed on Russia are actually, you know, like a boomerang bouncing back, and who's suffering are the workers in Europe and in the United States. And, you know, I think one of the conversations that we had is we have a little bit in common, that we're both anti-imperialist. I can safely say that. And we both have cats named after revolutionaries. My cat's name is Che, and your cat
is named Fidel Castro.
Yes. Now, is Fidel around or no?
Yeah, I think I could get him in if you just give me 1 second.
Okay. All right. Let me find when you bring Fidel, I'll try to find Che. So right now, audience, we have Don Carter from bringing.
I found him.
Here he is, introducing Fidel. Oh my God, he's adorable. Can I see his face? Can we see his face?
Yeah, here he is. He's very happy to be here. He's actually,
oh yes, he's gorgeous. Look at that man. Oh, look at that kitty, man kitty.
He's got the
all right, hold on, and I'll get Che. Hold on one second.
Cool.
You and talk about capitalism while I'm gone.
Yeah, of course. He was actually waiting to get in here this whole time, but yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Hold on.
I think it's pretty funny that, you know, we didn't even know each other when we got our cats at separate places in the world, and she named it Che Guevara and mine Fidel Castro. But yeah, this guy, he's very personable. He's got kind of the soul of a dog. He doesn't really act like a normal cat.
Okay.
I picked him up at the shelter, and it was just love at first sight, to be honest. And had him ever since. He's a very good companion.
Here is Che. And Che and Fidel Castro are meeting, and they haven't met since 1955.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, but they're in solidarity.
Yep.
Che actually was the rescue as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was a bottle baby. He lost his mom. So, oh, look at Fidel's very. Yeah. All right.
It's great
well,
having cats.
So it is funny that, we didn't know each other really. And then we both discovered that we had our kitties named after revolutionaries.
Out of all the communist revolutionaries that there were.
There you have it. There you have it. Well, I wanted to kind of do something lighthearted because it's been a rough weekend. For me personally, I had some family stuff. My daughter was ill and her fiance just got COVID. And so it was a rough. Yeah, we started out with this great celebration. We were going to do a celebration, and then it went well on Friday, but then she was quite ill and had to go to the hospital. She's okay now, but
thank goodness.
Yeah, but it's been and then all the news that came forward, and I wanted to give you my condolences for your friend and your colleague, Daria Dugin.
Thank you very much.
That was so shocking. And I was wondering if you could, Reef, if you could put up Alexander Dugin, who was her father, his statement for the audience to see. But Daria, for those of you who may not know, was a victim of a assassination by the SBU. Allegedly, that's what's come out from the FSB from their investigation. They've said that it was Ukraine SBU, that there was a car bomb. So if you want to talk a little bit more about this, Don, because you actually did a report on it. So.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I want to say is that I never knew that I'd understand the feeling of what it felt like to wake up in the morning and open the news and see someone that, you knew personally well. She wasn't an acquaintance. She wasn't one of my closest friends, but I had just seen her less than a month ago. And we were talking about how great it was that she had brought some anti-imperialists from a French-speaking African country to Russia to discuss closer cooperation between the two countries. And all of a sudden I woke up one morning and, there she was in the news. Not only was she killed, but like her body was burnt beyond recognition. It's a horrifying thing to wake up to. Basically what happened, and of course I can talk about it because everyone at work, I did a report out on it at work. Everyone there knows that I knew her personally. Basically, she was at a music and literature festival with her father. Sorry about that. My cat. Okay. They were at a music and literature festival together where her father was giving a talk and she was also participating. And at the very last moment, her dad decided to take a different car rather than the one he usually drives around, which everyone knows is his. And Daria decided that she was going to drive to wherever she wanted to drive. I guess I'm assuming home in this car that Alexander Dugin, her father, usually drives in. And it turns out there was a bomb planted under the driver's side of that car, which is what ended up killing her. Now, today, the official investigation from the FSB came out, and they identified the assassins. It was actually a 43-year-old woman named Natalia Vovk, who was a Ukrainian citizen. And there are, I don't know if this has been confirmed yet, but there are documents circulating around the internet that are allegedly hers. And if they are, then that would mean, if they can be connected back to this person, then that would mean that she was an agent of the Ukrainian Secret Services, which the FSB has already independently verified, and a member of the Azov neo-Nazi battalion. And when I looked at this information, it looked pretty clear to me that these documents were legit. And it's possible that they were already verified earlier today or in the last hour or whatever. But They talked about how they brought a car, a Mini Cooper. They drove a Mini Cooper into the Russian Federation with Donetsk People's Republic plates. They drove around Moscow with Kazakhstan plates. They left, fled to Estonia with Ukrainian plates. This is all caught on video in different places of the country. And I forgot to explain the other person involved in this. This woman brought her 12-year-old daughter. That her 12-year-old daughter is in the FSB report. And it's believed that she actually helped carry out this terrorist attack.
Oh my goodness.
So like and of course, Ukraine has not confirmed or denied involvement in this, but this is what it does all the time, even when it shells Russian territory. It's very clear that it was Ukrainian secret services. And I think it shows just the sheer desperation they're in right now, that they have to. I mean, for what purpose did they want to kill Alexander Dugin? He's not a political, he's not important to the proper functioning of the Russian political system. He's not a general, he's not a soldier. He's a philosopher and a political commentator. It's clear that Kiev is carrying out terrorist attacks to intimidate people who are ideologically motivated to oppose what Kiev's doing. And that's exactly who Alexander Dugin is, and that's exactly who Daria was. She was also a journalist and a political analyst that worked very hard. I mean,
and a highly educated philosopher herself. Yeah,
highly educated. She spoke many languages, and of course, we didn't agree on everything. But the main thing we agreed on was that U.S. imperialism had to go. You know, and she did great work. It's terrible. It's a terrible loss.
I'm really sorry for your loss. And it's astounding the way the Western media is already, you probably haven't even seen it because it just came out, but the Guardian's already calling the FSB report misinformation. So they're denying it. But that's the Guardian, who works closely with MI6, and that was exposed by the Gray Zone recently, and it's abhorrent. The way they are not giving balanced journalism. These are, again, trying to bend historical facts, or like a police investigation, in this case, an intelligence investigation. And I wanted to go further. Reif, could you show, so some of the Western headlines, and I wanted you to discuss this for a minute. I don't want to show the worst ones. I'll just show this one. Basically are implying that Alexander Dugin and Daria were simply Russian propagandists. Another one was they called Alexander Putin's brain, but he had never even met Vladimir Putin. So could you expand a little bit on the facts and the fiction around all of this?
Yeah, this is also something I talked about in my RT report today. The fact that the Western media has been constantly hyping up Alexander Dugin as this kind of like foreign policy advisor to Vladimir Putin. And as if like he's like some sort of high level ideological advisor in the Vladimir Putin administration. But I mean, we got to get our facts straight. Like the Kremlin has never officially identified any sort of connection with Alexander Dugin. And in Russian society, actually, he's considered a bit of like a fringe figure, like very marginal. He's not considered nearly what the Western media make him out to be here in Russia.
He's kind of like a Rush Limbaugh, to compare it to in the US. Would you say that? Like kind of like that?
Yeah. Like, he's
a little bit, he's obviously more educated and intelligent. I mean, the man is very educated philosopher, but
Yeah, he's got a large voice in the circle of intellectuals in Russia, but he's not in any way connected with the Russian government. And these accusations that they're fascists are even more ridiculous. This is like projecting. This is some stuff that Ukrainians that say the Azov battalion is not neo-Nazi say,
Oh, I know. And like, for instance, we mentioned the Guardian, they actually got caught airbrushing off the Nazi symbols of the Azov battalion from photos and got caught. Or excuse me, that was the BBC. The BBC got caught doing that. Yeah. Not the Guardian. Sorry.
Following their narrative.
What?
Following their narrative. They have to make
I mean, if it doesn't fit their narrative, they make it fit, right?
Yeah.
And or they'll blur out the picture of Stephen Bandera behind some of these spokespeople from Ukraine. When it's obvious. And then Vogue magazine did an article trying to rehabilitate Stephen Bandera, which was mind-blowing.
It's unbelievable.
And said that he wasn't a Nazi when I mean, again, it's the Western, which is really frightening. And I think the Roman Empire tried to do this as well. They try to write their own history. And that's, thinkers like Howard Zinn, Chomsky and others push back against this, like with books like The People's History. And I think that's kind of how I viewed Alexander Dugin. He was pushing back on misperceptions in history as well. And you can find his anti-fascist videos right online. If you look up his name, he talks against fascism. You can see that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly, the part of what he preaches and his ideology that I'm in approval of, And one thing I want to say also about Stepan Bandera and Western, apologists for him and claims by these Ukrainians that he wasn't a Nazi collaborator or anything. I just want to say something that that I heard from a museum curator and a historian when I went to Donbass and went to one of the main museums in the Lugansk People's Republic about their history of the Great Patriotic War. And he put it in very simple terms that nobody can argue with. There were no recorded battles between the Nazis and Stepan Bandera's groups. There were no recorded battles between them. And these Ukrainian nationalists try to say that they actually fought against the Nazis. They didn't. All of the battles fought with partisans are recorded between Nazis and communists. And those communists came in like over 90% from Donbass. So.
Thank you, because a lot of people just have the history muddled, and purposefully it's being muddled by the West. Again, it's to shape this narrative to justify this proxy war the US and NATO's fighting against Russia via Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I think that the narrative has been quickly falling apart because of tragedies that you've seen in the Donbass region that are being, war crimes that Ukraine is committing, and you can't deny it. And even Amnesty International has called out, of course they backtrack, but then now they've, they were saying they were trying to soften the language or something, but it happened. Like, you can't soften the language around that. Right?
Of course not. I don't understand, like you're saying. I mean, it's becoming so difficult for them to try and gloss over the crimes that the Ukrainian government is committing right now. I mean, even if you watch the mainstream media and you buy the idea that the Ukrainians are not the ones endangering the Zaporozhye atomic station right now, even though the regional authorities there said we need to stop these Ukrainian positions from firing on a nuclear power station to avoid another Chernobyl. Even if you buy that, it's just impossible to deny the fact that Ukraine is turning parts of Donetsk, People's Republic, and specifically the capital of Donetsk, into minefields. There's just no denying that they're shooting cluster munitions at areas that have no military targets in them, heavily populated with civilians. They're shooting cluster munitions that are dropping butterfly mines all over the place. And already scores and tons of people have been injured there. And these mines, they're banned by international law. Yes. They're banned because, and Ukraine was even supposed to have destroyed all of their pedal mines. They said that they did years ago. And the reason for that is because these mines are not even intended to kill people. They're intended to blow their legs off. They're intended to maim them in completely inhumane ways without killing them. And that is what the Ukrainians are doing to the Donbass people right now.
And this truth is so hard to get heard because RT is completely banned in Europe. And then, of course, censored in the US. And, journalists like Patrick Lancaster, Wyatt Reade, yourself, Ava Bartlett, who brought a lot of attention to the butterfly mines and was there and filmed it, are getting intimidated, harassed, threats on their life, demonetized. I think because you're in Moscow, I don't know how much of that you're receiving as far as backlash, but, Patrick Lancaster, for instance, had his whole family threatened by Ukrainian military. And of course, Ava Bartlett has, as well as Anna Lipp, who's a German journalist who now has been threatened with prison for her reporting in that region. So what are you finding as far as the reporting goes, as far as the truth coming out, do you feel like it's getting out there a little bit more, or do you still feel the frustration of the suppression and censorship?
I still feel the frustration of it, to be honest. I mean, I got threats just like that as well at the beginning of the military operation, when it was at the forefront of the Western media. They were all anonymous threats, but, you know, I had people sending me threats. They sent me the names of my parents and their address, threatening me to go do something to them. My website, the Revolution Report website, there were like hundreds of hacking attempts on it. Thank goodness we had like a protection software there. But this has generally calmed down as of late. And I think the reason for that is part of the mainstream media strategy to give Ukraine a little bit less attention than it was getting before, especially because there's a rift developing between Ukraine and the United States, and not just them, but also Ukraine and Poland, Ukraine and Germany, for all different historical reasons, for political decisions that Zelensky is deciding to make, because Zelensky seems like he's willing to go kamikaze. Like he's willing to like just fight down to the very last person and have a nuclear war if that's what it takes. And the West is like apprehensive about that. Obviously, you know, they feel like they unleashed Pandora's box. This is what's going on behind the scenes, and we can kind of see that also between in friction that's developing publicly. Like, for example, Polish officials have been saying that recently stuff that Ukraine is eventually going to have to admit that it committed genocide against the Polish people in World War II. Like, that's a bit random, you know, considering all this talk about being against Russia. We saw Ukraine's former ambassador defending Stepan Bandera in Germany and getting so much backlash from obviously the West, not inside Ukraine itself, but they were pressured so hard that they had to expel him. They had to dismiss him. There was also there were other instances that just aren't coming to my head right now, but we're seeing the cracks in this Western alliance. And it's because they're getting desperate. Western sanctions have fallen flat on their face. They've hurt, like you said, they've hurt the working people of the West, and the rich are just getting richer. In the US, in Russia, it's the opposite. The workers have benefited from the fact that the ruble has strengthened significantly in relation to the dollar. That means that normal Russians, you know, even though their salary has not changed, have a stronger currency for use abroad. And it actually means the opposite for Russian capitalists, because anyone who knows stuff about economics, you'll understand that when a currency strengthens in relation to foreign currencies, it makes it a lot more difficult for the capitalists of that country to compete from capitalists of other countries. So we're seeing it in Russia, and I've been in the State Duma, looking at listening to the discussions that the different parties are having. The representatives of the capitalist class here are really pushing for the currency to inflate. They really want to inflate the currency back to where it was. And the Communist Party and United Russia are saying we don't want to do that. So
you know, it's interesting that you brought all that up, because I remember in 2018 I had written a piece that got used against me later that complimented Vladimir Putin. But what I did is, because, you know, I have family members, my brother is almost a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and martial arts is an interesting way of thinking. It's not just a sport, but it's actually a way of approaching things. And Vladimir Putin does judo. And I said in my article that he has almost a judo-like strategy when it comes to geopolitics, something like that, about using the weight. In other words, letting the weight be thrown around to his advantage. So in other words, the West, what it's doing with the sanctions, it's almost like he didn't resist it outwardly. He went with it and did economic development within Russia, because Russia has vast resources and is able to create their own grains and, you know, science development, tech development, all of that. They have the human and literal resources to create their own markets. They don't need the US. They don't need Europe. They don't have to get cheese from France. They can create their own, right? Which has been award winning, actually. And my point is that it kind of translates to movements. movements are looking at this. Yes, there's a place for marching in the streets and you make that noise, but there's more long-term benefits from development within your communities. And so you see that strategy of sort of like, so in other words, to bring it back to what I'm trying to say, what I see is that rather than Russia resisting the West outwardly with a bunch of rhetoric, they basically just went inward and developed economically so that they're cushioned from the sanctions. It doesn't matter, right? And built alliances. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They learned, and to be honest, everything you're talking about here is intertwined with Ukraine also, not from recently, but from 2014.
Right.
Because when the Euromaidan coup d'etat happened in Ukraine, obviously Russia wasn't happy about that. And Russia sent humanitarian aid to the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And, you know, although Russia didn't say that these People's Republics, that we recognize them as independent, they were trying to help them because they were Russians there and they were fighting, you know, a war of liberation. And that got the West to put serious sanctions on Russia, which at that point, the economy was seriously tied into the Western financial system, in which there are only, you know, one class of winners, the Western financiers. And that created a terrible economic crisis in Russia. And after that, the Putin administration realized that the only way they can prevent that from happening again is if they're independent of the US dollar, independent of Western financial markets. And basically from then up until now, there's been a change. There's been an attempt towards cutting down significantly dollar reserves, paying off the country's foreign debts, running a surplus to a budgetary surplus to accomplish that, and buying up as much gold as possible, because gold is really the international currency that basically guarantees independence, financial independence, because gold everyone accepts, you know. And this is something that precisely why Western sanctions backfired so terribly this time, because they prepared for it. And at the same time, they developed their domestic industries as well. I mean, Russia now has the largest grain harvests in its history. It's the world's, I'm pretty sure it's the world's largest exporter of grain. China's the largest producer of grain, and Russia is the world's largest exporter of grain. So that's why, you know, whatever food problems, global food problems happen, which of course Russia's done everything it can to prevent from happening, it's not going to hurt Russia, and it's not going to hurt the US either. And the US knows that. It's going to hurt Europe. And it's like Washington doesn't care. It's going to hurt Europe, it's going to hurt Africa, it's going to hurt Latin America, all these places that Europe really, Washington really doesn't seem to care that much about. No.
Well, and to go to what you were saying before in the show that I was on with you, and then also actually Vladimir Putin himself talked about, is the multipolar world versus the West forcing the unipolar world. This proxy war is about economics. It's really about the West trying to cling to power, almost like the Roman Empire. So could you talk a little bit about how, because you're in Russia, in Moscow, visualize, you can see for yourself the alliances being built, you know, and the different initiatives that are happening. Could you explain the multipolar world to the audience that may not be familiar with that vernacular?
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone wants to learn more about it, I made a video about it on my YouTube channel. You can also check that out. But it's really something fascinating to witness happen before your very eyes. Basically, you know, when we talk about unipolarity, this is the world order that existed after World War II. The United States was ruling the roost. I mean, basically the entire world was destroyed by the chaos of World War II, except for the United States. If I remember correctly, the United States at the end of World War II had over 60% of the entire wealth in the entire world. And so that legacy has continued. And of course, we're not talking about the socialist world here, but inside the world capitalist system, because of course there was the Soviet Union and China. But inside the capitalist world, the United States ruled the roost. It was at the top of that world. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, it just basically significantly expanded that that power behind what we call the unipolar world order, which is led by Washington. It's got its, you know, essentially vassal states in Western Europe that do whatever it says. And we're seeing an end to that because of what's happening in Ukraine. And to be honest, the West did it to itself, because if it did not launch this unprecedented level of sanctions against Russia, which, by the way, Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world. It's more sanctioned than North Korea.
Even more than Cuba?
Yeah. It's more sanctioned than Cuba. It's more sanctioned than North Korea. It's more sanctioned than Iran. And yet it's doing amazingly in comparison to these other countries that are sanctioned by Western imperialism. And so by launching these sanctions, they've really created the situation for themselves. And it's not only weakening the unipolar world order, but it's turning all of these countries that were previously neutral, wanted to stay out of all of this. It's turning them against the Western world and basically putting them into the hands of Russia, and it's strengthening the relationship between Russia and China as well. When if you've been following what's been going on around Taiwan, it's basically been a similar situation to how China reacted to what happened in Ukraine. China and Russia are sticking together, and there's more and more talk about closer cooperation. The foreign ministries are, you know, talking a lot more about how great things are between them. Even the West's worst nightmare is actually coming to fruition. Vladimir Putin is, you know, actively talking about building closer, more, you know, thorough relations with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, with North Korea. This is really like the worst thing that could possibly be thought of in Washington. And so what we say when we talk about a multipolar world, we talk about a world of a world ruled by countries that are either part of the socialist camp or part of this camp of the capitalist world that used to be dependent on Washington and its Western imperialist vassal states, that are trying to break away from that and create something new. And it's very clear from what's going on that after the Ukraine conflict ends, the United States is not going to be able to bully other countries into giving into their will as they were able to before. Definitely not.
You know, and I wanted to ask you one more thing, and then I wanted to bring in a couple questions or comments from the audience. But I wanted to ask you about your day-to-day life. You live in Moscow now. What are some of the things that you enjoy that kind of give a contrast? And it doesn't say that Russia's better, America's better, you know, not like that. And I don't mean it in that tone. I mean, just as far as your day-to-day life, what is your quality of life like? And, you know, in comparison to being a young person starting out in America, because you're, you know, still in your 20s, you're looking into, you know, building your career and your life. And it's very hard to do that in America right now, financially, and even to get viable work. So what's the contrast? Well,
I'll try to speak in terms that are basically universal to everyone. So I can, you know, make the most amount of people feel included in what I'm saying. Healthcare is free, completely free. And but there's like levels. So if you don't have a job or anything, you get a basic level of healthcare that is like unalienable.
So you don't get a bankruptcy if you get a surgery or something?
No.
Okay.
For example, I had COVID, and when I had COVID, I also have supplementary medical insurance, because depending on your job, you get supplementary medical insurance that gives you like access to different hospitals that might be nicer or whatever, but you're guaranteed healthcare. And when I had COVID, the law requires the state healthcare to take care of it. And, you know, I was taken care of. They gave me antiviral medication that made me get better with no cost. The doctor just came to my house, took a look at me, and took a test, came back when the test said positive. He wrote me a plan of taking the medication, gave me all the medication, and just left, and was like, in a week you got to go back to the doctor so we could take another look at you. Not a dime I spent.
Wow.
And so that's healthcare in Russia. Education is, or of course, we're talking about higher education because, of course, high school and everything is free. But higher education is paid, but it's nothing in comparison to the West. It's such a small amount. It wouldn't cripple anyone's family,
So a working class person, like, let's say that's just, like maybe you have someone who's like, I don't know, working as a cable salesperson. Their child wants to go to college. They could go to college. And not go into huge debt.
Definitely. And there's actually there's actually something in the Russian education system where if you study hard enough and your grades are good enough, then you are guaranteed to get education for free as well. And it's not done in the way that we see in the United States, where it's kind of a competition. Only the best students get this free education, and they're competing in a pool of others
For scholarship.
Yeah, but every student has the opportunity to get that if they can have if they get their grades good enough. And so there's not really a class division of the kind of levels of education that are available to people. Public transport in Moscow is some of the best in the world. I mean, I only say some of the best in the world because I haven't been everywhere in the world. I've been to a lot of places, but I haven't been everywhere. But in terms of all the places that I've been to, Moscow has the best public transportation in the world. It costs, for example, the metro is super thorough. It's like museums inside. Every station is like a museum. It's incredible how clean it is. It's incredible how beautiful it is. There's literally chandeliers hanging from the ceiling in the metro.
Wow.
And it costs like the equivalent of $1 to go wherever you want. There's buses all over the place. There's trams. If you need to get somewhere, public transport will take you that way. That's why, I could afford a car, and I really like cars. I used to have a car in New Jersey when I lived there, but I always remember it was just such a pain in the butt in terms of how much you had to pay for insurance and registration and all this stuff. And then if something breaks, you have to go to the mechanic and spend like just as much money as you spend on the car just to repair it.
Right.
And here in Moscow, I could just, I would never get a car. There's just no reason for me to have it.
No reason to sit in traffic or do any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, the traffic's horrible. That's all.
And what about the food in the restaurants and things like that?
Oh, it's awesome. I love
World class?
I love Russian food. Yeah, I love Russian food, like borscht and all that stuff. But you could also get like American food here. It's actually funny. There's like American styled diners in Russia. Like our food is basically like exotic to them. So they have stuff like called Beverly Hills Diner, and
that's funny.
And the aesthetic is like red booths with checkered tile floors, and everyone's dressed like it's the 1950s, and there's like Elvis statues, and you can get like a burger and fries or milkshakes and stuff like that. And they actually taste like they're from an American diner, I have to say. I can verify that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so they have stuff like that. And I mean, the general quality of food is great. I think it's
they have a lot of farmers. They have a lot of agriculture there. I've seen, some of that. So pretty good vegetables and stuff. And I've seen that they don't use as many chemicals as we do in the US. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. Also, I don't really know too much about GMOs, but they're basically in nothing here. Everything, like tons of food says no GMO or whatever. And I remember something we were talking about before when we weren't on camera about, I remember you asked me if there was like a lot of availability of organic food and stuff like that.
Right.
In the West already, it's kind of a premium. You kind of got to spend more money just to have like farm.
For organic lettuce, it's $6 for a head of lettuce.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, in Russia, it's like the opposite. Like you can go to like a farmer's market, and that stuff is kind of considered stuff you'd find in the village. Russians kind of look down on it a little bit, but you could get fresh food there very easily. Interesting.
All right. Well, I wanted to bring in a couple of comments or questions. Reef, do you have anything that you want to highlight?
Yipper asks, Fee from Convo Couch said Russia pizza better. Is that true? That's what they wanted to know.
Okay, I have to give him the background on this. Okay, so when I went to Chicago, I was on Hardline Media, and there is Fee has been calling out Chicago pizza, that New York pizza was better than Chicago pizza, or actually she said, which I think is right, Italy. So there is an ongoing online pizza controversy, and I'm sorry to drag you into this, Don, but you are now dragged in. You have lived in New York, you've been to Chicago, you live in Russia. Yeah. Let's put a pin in the pizza controversy and get Fee to stop talking smack. Who has the best pizza?
All right. First of all, I want to say it's a pleasure to work with her now at Russia Today. We both work together there. But I have to say, as someone who comes from New York, we have the best pizza in the world. There's nowhere where there's better pizza. Not even in Italy, I have to say.
Well, Hardlines Media, I was there at their studios. They gave me some deep dish. It was phenomenal. I've had thin crust, which is very different in New York, and that's very good too. But so I've never been to Moscow. So now Fee says Moscow has some great pizza. What is your thought on that?
I'm sorry, I respectfully completely disagree, but I should talk to her and see where she's getting her pizza from, because
all right,
I've had some bad, like really doughy pizza in Russia, but maybe there's a place I don't know about.
You heard it here. It looks like Fees might be called out for some bad news there. But I have Fee coming on the show next Thursday for my audience that wants to know. She'll be talking about her transition to Moscow, and cool. The pizza controversy will continue into next week.
Right, great. I'm excited to hear what she says about it.
There you go. We'll get her opinion on camera. All right. Any more, Reef? Thanks for being dragged in, Don. And just get ready to get trolled by Chicago.
All right, I'm ready.
So they're asking, Alexander isn't a close ally of Putin, as the Western narrative is saying. A
lot of people, they're hearing this over and over. This is on every single headline. Can you address it one more time, please?
That who's a close ally?
Alexander Dugin.
Alexander, Dugin.
Well, yeah. So I'll just, repeat what I said before. The Western media makes him out as if he's like Putin's sidekick, but that's just far from the truth. I mean, Alexander Dugin approves of a lot of what Vladimir Putin's administration does, but he doesn't approve of all of it, and he's not an official advisor. And we don't have any evidence that he's ever even met Vladimir Putin. So, okay.
All right. Anything else, Reef? You want to highlight?
Other than 2 times said Dugin got pushed out of university. The Kremlin pushed him out of university, apparently. That's what this person's saying.
I don't know about that. Can you speak to that?
I don't know about it.
Don?
I don't know about it.
Okay,
I don't know that much. I really don't know that much about Alexander Dugin, other than what I just said, and the fact that I know the basics of his neo-Eurasianism ideas, but I'm not an expert on that.
All right. I wanted to bring up something. As you know, I was in Chicago and received an award from CPI, and there's been some discussion. And by the way, Reef, I thank you for doing all that. And audience, thank you for your questions and comments. Keep them coming. I'm going to address the CPI thing that's online that many of my audience members knows about, because there was a recent article that was written about Caleb Maupin. And I want to say this real quickly from my perspective. I have interacted with Caleb as a professional. I contributed op-eds to RT and knew him to be of RT. And we have talked about those kinds of things. We've talked about anti-imperialism. We have a lot of the same views. I guess what I want to say is that I think I lost Don there. Did we lose Don? Camera. Yeah, Don, could you get your camera back on?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just couldn't see you. There you are. It went out again. So you work on that while I Okay, so what I wanted to say is this. Many of you know that I came forward about Joe Biden. I went through protocol in 1993. I did not go public for a long time. I don't want people tweeting at me, contacting me, and trying to equate situations that have nothing to do with this situation. First of all, I was given an award by CPI and reached out to by Caleb, who has always been a professional. And my interactions with him have always been professional, positive. He's a colleague. He's been very empathetic about the hits that I took online and my life being basically decimated for coming forward. And I appreciate that. 2 nights before I was to go to the conference, I was woken up by midnight by someone I don't even know who was telling me not to go to the conference. And it came to my attention that people didn't want me speaking at the conference and wanted the conference shut down. So I'm looking at this in a different way. I'm examining this article that came out, really vilifying Caleb in many ways. Critically, I'm looking at it critically because I know that there was a very concerted attempt to silence and disavow this organization. And so I want a more nuanced conversation about what's really gone on in the future. Right now, I just don't know, but I do know that my interactions with Caleb were very positive, professional, and all wrapped around talking about anti-imperialism. And that's the space that I want to be in. I really am not interested in people's personal life. I don't know anything about Caleb's personal life at all, and nor do I was very disgusted to see some of the comments and some of the things that were posted online. So I just want to say that much. And Dawn, I wanted to ask you, I'm going to post right here, Reef, if you could post up Caleb's official response thus far. Since this has all happened, of course, CPI has been dissolved. But this was his statement for the audience to read. The only statement he's made publicly. I've had very few conversations, but when I have had them, he was very forthcoming and very, very direct. So I appreciate his directness. So Don, could you please say whatever it is that you feel comfortable saying about CPI and this situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, like you, I don't really want to get too much into, the personal aspects of this and whatnot. All I want to say is that, Caleb did engage to a certain degree in misconduct, and he admitted that he needs, some sort of therapy, and I believe people can change. And, he was expelled from the organization because of that. But what we should really be looking at here is how this all came about, because there were rumors going around for weeks that there was something going on behind the scenes. Not because people cared about this misconduct, but because people were there was some sort of concerted effort going on to destroy this organization. I mean, we have to understand, this came like after the video of the Chicago conference went viral. It got over 5 million or 6 million views. CPI was rapidly getting more attention.
And Newsweek, it was in Newsweek, yeah.
It was in Newsweek. It was being published in mainstream publications. Of course, they were trying to kill the organization by giving it negative attention. But this stuff, it was very timely that stuff came out at the same time. And then, of course, Vosh and all these bread tubers came to pick apart the pieces when stuff began to become very chaotic. But it just seemed like something was organized behind the scenes, especially because, this article that was put out, it was mostly just an attack on his character about stuff that isn't anyone else's business connected to sex. Another thing is that there are things that I, as a member of CPI, can say are just.
We lost you, Don. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
You're back. Oh, you're okay.
There we go. All right. You hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that a lot of the original article, I can say was just not true because of my experience in the organization and being in the executive committee of it. I know that our organization was not a cult. It did not engage in cult cult tactics, and it also, Keaton didn't. Sorry, not Keaton. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the people mentioned in this article, Keaton, who actually had a personal beef with Caleb, and also actually had a sort of romantic conflict of interest with this person in question. So this is a whole other story I don't want to get too much into, but okay. This is the person making the accusations that our organization was a cult, which it was not. It functioned in no way like a cult. And also, it has to be said that Caleb was not monetarily benefiting from this organization, as is claimed in this article. That's just not true at all. If this, I mean, this organization was costing people money, and if it was costing anyone money, it was definitely costing Caleb money. He was the one putting the most money into it. Yeah. So there's a lot. The majority of this article was really just nonsense, and it was a combination of nonsense and a sort of attempted character assassination by focusing on, unconventional sexual things that are none of anyone's business
between consenting adults, and that's the key. Yeah.
But there was a degree of misconduct that he admitted to, and he was expelled for it. And he's saying he's going to go to therapy, and that's that. But that should not result in the collapse of an entire anti-imperialist organization.
You're right. I think, and just, so people know, I think that there'll be more discussions around this, but let's try to keep it to this, that people's personal lives can make them vulnerable to attacks, right? Because we're humans, and we engage in human behavior, and we make mistakes. And for instance, and I'll give a small for instance, one of the people that came forward about me telling them about what happened to me right after it happened, had their divorce and bankruptcy strewn across online publicly after they appeared as a witness. And these are tactics. Okay. So recognize the difference between tactics to smear someone's character and actual, whatever. My view on this is that these conversations are necessary to have, because we don't want abuse of power, and we don't want things to happen without people's consent, right?
100%.
These are very pivotal conversations, and we need to grow, but they need to be done with some emotional intelligence and not as a weaponization to try to shut down, as a separate matter, a whole movement or a whole thought, just like, even in my case, like I had something horrible happen to me, but I didn't want the whole Democratic Party to shut down. I didn't want, what I mean? Like so we need to look at these in a nuanced way. We need to have these tough conversations, but with emotional intelligence. And in that, what I want to say, John, to you is I want to kind of pivot over to, in general, back to what we talked about earlier about attacks on journalists that are being really amplified right now, particularly by Ukrainian trolls. There's this troll site, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm a target of theirs. It's a Ukraine military. They have a picture of a dog or something. Reef, do you know the name of it? No, it's a Ukraine thing. Oh, they are. Okay, so what? AFO, that was the acronym I was looking for. So you have them really attacking people's, and journalists in particular, threatening them, but also attacking their character. I mean, how much longer are these tactics going to work, Don? And what can we do as people consuming media to?
Oh, sorry, I think I lost you at the end there. Could you repeat the end?
What can we do as people consuming media, trying to discern the truth? How can we stop, like these false kind of character smears, and basically that are prohibiting journalists like Wyatt Reade or Patrick Lancaster or Ava Bartlett from doing their jobs effectively?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, the biggest issue is that we can't control what goes on the internet, and these Ukrainians have plenty of their own cyber trolls. That's for sure.
Yes, they do.
Funded
by the West, probably. Yeah.
Of course. I think it's just better to try to not engage with them, frankly. And this is why, I really don't like Twitter as a platform at all. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I have it because I'm a journalist, and basically it's necessary to have it in this day and age.
Same.
But I hate it. I hate how the atmosphere there is so toxic. People just spend so much time there just spreading hate. I mean, for example, when Daria was killed, I made a post saying it's so horrible that my friend was killed,
right.
Rest in peace. Something one would think is wholesome, and I get a bunch of Ukrainian trolls posting on the post saying good that she died. Let her father die too. This is crazy.
I know. It's been shocking, John. I've seen that on yours and others, and even on media that's reported on it. The Ukraine response, and all I have to say is that hatred, that vitriol. I mean, that's just Twitter. That's one, but it's also happening on Telegram. But that's that's really telling a lot about what the US and NATO is funding. They're funding hate. They're funding neo-Nazis.
Yeah, and one thing I mentioned in my report at RT today was actually I specifically touched upon that point because recently the Ukrainian envoy to Kazakhstan posted a video on his Telegram saying that he thought that all Russians should be killed so that the children of Ukrainians don't have to do it. This is is normal rhetoric for officials. Ukrainian officials now.
Yeah. This isn't a random on the internet. This is a Ukrainian representative. Yeah.
Yeah. To Kazakhstan, an official.
And that we're funding. The US and NATO is funding with, the tune of 57 billion total, if not more.
Yeah. And the mainstream Ukrainian media is constantly having people on that are saying we should be targeting nuclear power stations on Russian territory. We should nuke them. This stuff's going on all the time. But again, this is one of the reasons why I decided to learn Russian, because when you don't speak the language they speak, the only information that's available to you is what the mainstream media and the government you're living under decide to translate for you. And that's so messed up,
That's a good point. That's a very good point. But I think, for our audience members here, I think what's important is that we need to critically read, think, watch, right? And Don, we lost you again, so try to get back with us. And I also want to say that supporting independent news and independent media is very important. Supporting the Convo Couch, supporting Fee, supporting you and your YouTube channel, but supporting, INN is Indy and Reef, and thank you, Reef, again for engineering today. They volunteer their time and help content creators. No one's getting paid for that. They're actually helping. So support your independent, and you can get more views of what's really going on. When you kind of look at the synthetic left that gets, that they're funded by billionaires, they'll take the narrative as far left as they choose to take it, that is allowed by the billionaire funding it, right? But if you want real content and real critical thinking about this, check out Revolutionary Black Network. Check out, the guests that I have today, Don. Check out Wyatt Reade and Patrick Lancaster and Aaron Mate, and they're not being funded by billionaires. So, I'm really, when I was at this event this weekend, there was a Russian national there who came and wanted a poster of my brother. And he talked to me about how hard it is. My brother's a comedian, Colin. Anyway, that's another story. But my point of that conversation is that he talked about moving here and loving America and starting a business, and how much bias there is against him. He's lost business and he has nothing to do with what's going on in Russia. No opinions about politics at all. He's in a completely separate field. And he's mystified by the myths that Americans have about Russians. And this vilification is only serving one master, and that's the military industrial complex. Would you agree with that, Don? And do you have any thoughts about the Russophobia?
Yeah, I definitely do have some thoughts about that. Your comment about the military industrial complex is spot on. I mean, it's something that I'm going to be mentioning in this documentary I'm coming out with about the Donbass conflict, that the only people in the West that have won from this, that have come out on top, the same way that really like corporations like Amazon came out on top after throughout the COVID period. In this situation, it's the weapons manufacturers, because all this money has been given to Ukraine in the form of military, reinforcing its military, and also in terms of how much money has been given to the American military corporations to produce the weapons necessary to send over there. I mean, they've gotten so much money. And, you know, next year, for 2023, the military budget is expected to rise by $100 billion. We're looking at a military budget that's going to be somewhere between 840 and 860 billion dollars, almost $1 trillion of American taxpayer money going to war. That means that for every American, paying over half of their federal income taxes are going to war. What's the point of that?
You know, I have not heard it put like that. Thank you, Don. And I'm going to remember that. Half of
over
that.
Half.
That's
and
amazing.
We can't afford free healthcare or free education. That's absolutely insane. When Russia's GDP is significantly smaller than the United States, and they can afford to give their people quality healthcare and education.
And even China doesn't spend this much on military. I mean, and China's a more vast economy and country in some ways. So
actually, the amount, the sheer magnitude of the U.S. military budget, it's larger than the next 8 most funded militaries in the world combined.
Wow. Well, for those of you that are listening, and I know a lot of my audience is very anti-war, truly anti-war, not fake anti-war. I know that that's really disturbing. You know, I really found this conversation really illuminating. I wanted to leave it with 2 things. First, I'd like you to discuss how people can find your documentary and a trailer of it. So if they want to look at it and when it's being released.
Sure. Well, I actually have a trailer that I just haven't made public yet. I've been sharing it with organizations in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic so they can see our progress. But maybe I should come up with something and send it to you, and you could publish it and share it with your viewers as well. But I expect it to be done by the end of this month. But I have to be honest, with all this news about Daria Dugin and the collapse of CPI, all this stuff has just come onto my plate all at the same time. So I'm not sure. It might get done early September, but I'm really hoping to have it done and published on my YouTube channel.
We lost him for a second, but it looks like he's going to have it done and published soon. Okay. So while you kind of handle that, let me handle some business here. I wanted to do a shout out to INN. Thank you, Independent News Network. Please, people, you can see it, the links in my chat. Follow Don's work. You can follow him on RT as well, but also his channel. And then we'll look for your documentary. I also, Reef, do you have any final comments or questions that you want to lift up, that we can lift up before we say goodbye? Today?
Not really. I think we hit everything. So
okay, great. And I see the comments kind of there on the screen. Is there any that you want to highlight or read?
I think we got most of them. People just listing other places like Savvy Sabs to check out and the Bank Sisters and Hardlands and stuff like that. So I think everyone
Yeah,
was,
and those are all places. I'm glad you mentioned them by name because Sabby Sabs is a great content creator. The Black Revolutionary Network, Hardlands Media, which is deep in the pizza controversy as well as raising up other really important geopolitical and domestic issues. So check out their shows because they have really in-depth analysis of things going on, not just pizza. And then of course there's Reefer After Dark. There's with Reef, who's the engineer here. There's Jesse Jet's music, which he's doing some great pieces right now. And I want to give a shout out to Jesse Jet because he's just prolific. Last night, another one of his great pieces dropped. You heard his music in my intro. He did the theme music for Sabby Sabs and for me. And I am really privileged to know, I feel really honored to know Jesse and call him my friend. And then I also really want people, encourage them to share and subscribe and watch my content as well as Don's. And Don, I really want to leave kind of like any final thoughts that you want to leave our audience with before we sign off.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on your show. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of your viewers already are tuned into alternative media sources and everything, but I'd just like to reiterate that there's a lot of propaganda going on around right now, specifically about Ukraine, and even, about anyone who opposes Washington right now. So I would definitely suggest that you continue, if you're a political activist, the good fight. If you just like to follow alternative media, to continue that, because it's important to have both sides to make a good decision on where you stand. So.
Well, again, thank you for being on the show, Don. And I, my condolences for the loss of your friend and colleague, Daria Dugan. And
Thanks.
For more information about that story and kind of what happened there, you can follow Don on RT. He just did a report that should be up on Rumble that you can see. And please stay safe, Don, as well as our other investigative journalists that are out there putting their lives at risk and their livelihoods to bring us, the truth and balance. So there you have it, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Politics of Survival. Next week, we're going to have Fee on, and we'll have further discussion about life in Moscow for a young American woman going and starting a career with RT. And also we'll settle that pizza controversy, or at least maybe not settle it, but we'll have more deep conversations. All right, everyone, take care. Stay safe. Till next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.